Thank you, everybody. Well, welcome. Good evening. Welcome to this important briefing about Sizewell C. My name's Alison Downs. I'm the Executive Director of Stop Sizewell C. This session is going to be divided into two sections. We want to start by sharing some short presentations about where we are in terms of the Sizewell C Development Consent Order application, which we'll be referring to as DCO. I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader context in which we're working and touch on some community aspects. And then I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Adam Rowlands from the RSPB, who will give a brief update on issues affecting Minsmere. Actually, I should have said before that, Charles McDowell will speak about transport and economy, and Paul Collins will cover a few environmental issues, including impacts on the coast. We're going to then have a Q&A session. Please, could you use the comments box to ask your questions? Make sure that it's directed to everyone. And we'll hopefully be able to unmute the people and get them to ask the questions directly. But since we're now nearly 50 people in the call, you know, if that gets too complicated, we may have to read the questions out, but we'll try and avoid that. We're then going to, in the second part of this session, talk about the practicalities of what you can do to take part in the planning process. And there'll be another opportunity to ask questions at that point. Now, the information that we're going to share is on our website, stopsizewellc.org. Hopefully you all know that web address. But in the top bar of our website, you'll see a menu item that is called Take Part in the Planning Process. And that's where you need to go to find all of this information. I'm going to start then with a very brief overview of what's happening outside of the DCO process. Really, I think you could probably sum up EDF's case for Sizewell C as resting on three pillars. The sort of case for needing always on energy to provide our future energy needs. The second one, that it's necessary for the UK to reach net zero. And the third one, that Sizewell C will create jobs and economic benefits. Now, the first of those is becoming a rapidly redundant argument, regardless of the fact that nuclear plants are not always on. The concept of baseload, that sort of power that is always there, is becoming increasingly outdated. And with the development of storage technology, will become even more so. And in fact, National Grid said the other day that everyone converting to electric vehicles overnight wouldn't stress the grid either. In terms of Sizewell C's role in net zero, well, you may have seen a couple of weeks ago an article in the Times which reported the admission in EDF's DCO documents that it will actually take 6 years to offset the 5.74 million tonnes of CO2 that will be emitted from the construction process. So just to be clear, this means Sizewell C will not be making any positive contribution to the UK's net zero target until 2040, so 20 years from now, and that's assuming that there's no delay in the construction, which we all know is a bit problematic. This is mainly because the rest of the grid will be much greener by 2034 when Sizewell C is supposed to come online, so it won't be displacing such carbon intensive power sources. But what it means, as far as we're concerned, is that EDF's claim in its publicity materials that it will save 9 million tonnes of CO2 a year, or even 540 million tonnes over its 60-year lifetime, is only true if it's directly displacing natural gas. So to say that, you know, is suggesting that the UK will be generating baseload electricity using national gas in the 2090s, which no one believes is going to be the case. And you can find out more about that on our website, but you may have seen that it was reported in the Times, which was very welcome. The third pillar of Sizewell C's case is about rebuilding the economy. Now, we don't dispute big infrastructure projects create jobs, but they're more boom and bust than sustainable. And what we do dispute is that the economic benefits to Suffolk will be what EDF are claiming. And we've just published an independent critique of EDF's economic statement, which Charles will say a bit more about. But you may have seen that on Look East last night, and also it's online at the East Anglian Daily Times' website today. So in terms of looking at the DCO documentation itself, one of the first things we looked at when it was published is how much Sizewell C was expected to cost. And we quickly jumped on the revelation of £20 billion, and we alerted the Financial Times and the Times to that. And just last week, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy revealed updated figures that showed the cost of renewables has fallen much further, much faster than government expected. And it published very clear comparisons with fossil fuels, but somewhat mischievously avoided comparisons with nuclear. EDF's biggest challenge is to find people who are prepared to pay for Sizewell C. And one of their biggest costs is the costs of financing. And that's why they have been pushing for a regulated asset-based model, which we refer to as a nuclear tax, where a surcharge would be added to the energy bills of every UK household, regardless of supplier, regardless of tariff, to go towards building Sizewell C. Now, we're hearing that the Treasury is not that keen on the idea. Obviously, there's quite a bit of tension between Downing Street and the Treasury at the moment, but we're watching closely to see what that might mean. Another controversial element of this proposal is China. Backbench MPs have managed to force a U-turn on Huawei and certainly have the bit between their teeth about China's role in other sensitive infrastructure. And they are fully briefed on the role of China General Nuclear in Sizewell C, as well as Bradwell and Hinkley. 2 days ago, the Daily Telegraph reported the UK nuclear industry is at something of a crossroads, probably losing China's financing, highlighting that France may also be losing patience with EDF, given that the company was recently fined for misleading investors over the Hinkley Point decision, and of course the ongoing fiasco of Flamanville. Hinkley itself is very likely now be going to run late because of COVID, not necessarily just because of COVID. They may also have a technical issue because malfunctioning safety valves were found at the EPR new build in Finland called Olkiluoto. And if those faults were found to be down to design or manufacture, then it will affect the Hinkley valves, which were due to be manufactured this year. So closer to home, what's happening? Well, Dan Poulter, MP, is now opposed to Sizewell C. We know of at least 8 towns and parishes that oppose Sizewell C. If you hear of any more, please let us know. Together Against Sizewell C's judicial review of East Suffolk Council's decision to allow EDF to relocate Sizewell B facilities to make way for Sizewell C is going to be heard tomorrow. So obviously we wish them huge amounts of luck for that. Coming up, there is expected to be an energy white paper in the autumn, massively overdue already. There's also probably a budget in November, both of which have set the nuclear industry on the offensive. Very, very keen to get some assurances, some public assurances about commitment to projects like Sizewell. And at the end of this month, the Secretary of State for Business is due to make a decision on the planning application for new reactors on Anglesey, the Wolver project. So that's just a whistle-stop tour of what what's going on outside of the world of the planning application itself. But moving on to what we've been looking at in the documents, and I should say, we certainly haven't read the whole thing. Not even the councils have read the whole thing. We've tried to hone in on kind of key areas, and we do want to thank everybody who's been helping us by looking at bits of this application process. I've spoken to quite a number of you, and we're hugely grateful. So it's possible that you know stuff that we don't, in which case obviously we would love to hear from you. But just touching on some community and amenity impacts, I think one of the key things is that the worker numbers are right at the top end of what EDF's been talking about over the years, and the vast majority are going to come from outside the area. So that means 6,000 workers are going to be coming into East Suffolk and needing accommodation here. They'll be in a 2,400 bed campus that, as you know, the people of Eastbridge and Theberton are violently opposed to. They'll be in caravan sites, you know, a lot of them will be in tourist accommodation, and a lot of them will be in the private rental sector as well. The construction site, the campus, the new roads, the park and ride facilities, all of this whole mass of put together that makes the whole project will bring noise, air and light pollution and massive disruption for local communities. Properties that are near the site or near new roads will have significant noise increases. There are parts of Eastbridge that will see increases in their ambient noise levels that are 600 times louder. Leiston Old Abbey Care Home will have an increase of 200 times. And lots of concerns about local people's access to health services, blue light services, and, you know, the mental health really of people who are worried about this project, especially vulnerable people. Footpaths and beaches will be closed. EDF says changes to views, noise, air quality or traffic could affect users of local footpaths' perception of tranquility, which is a great expression, isn't it? We're obviously clear that the project will significantly change views from many places on the coast. EDF is resorted to huge on-site pylons instead of underground cabling, and they've provided no visualizations of what the site will look like during construction, which is something that developers have provided elsewhere, and I think really EDF should do that here. And finally, there are about 90 grade 2 listed buildings that are within 5 kilometres of the site that EDF acknowledges may be impacted. So, having given you that rather extensive overview, I'm going to ask Charles to speak to you now.
Ali, and hi everybody. I'm going to cover transport, which is obviously a big factor and affecting a much wider footprint than the immediate site, and the economy and the economic factors that come into play. Firstly, on transport, through the 4 stages of consultation that we suffered, the EDF eventually ended up with 3 different transport strategies in their consultation document. The strategies were rail-led, integrated and road-led. The road-led being the worst case scenario where they couldn't put enough onto other forms of transport. And everybody from the councils to our MP felt that that was definitely the worst case. The figures that they've come out with in the DCO application are in fact worse than the worst case. I won't bore you with all the numbers in detail, but suffice to say that they're talking of 750 HGVs using the existing B1122 for the first 2 years. 750 HGVs a day, I should say. And overall, you're looking at 10,000 cars, as well as all those HGVs, plus vans, plus buses, joining the A12, of which 2/3 will be crossing the Orwell Bridge. So it's a fundamental change to the traffic situation of this part of Suffolk, and it's going to have huge implications for anybody living in this area. The one proposal that we had pushed for is that the link road that they are proposing come on a different route south of Saxmundham, which would therefore provide a better link in the future for Leiston and not split up communities and the villages and farms in the way that their proposed link road route do. Sad to say, and not unusual for EDF in the entire process, is that they're not interested in leaving a positive legacy. The road that they have proposed will be of no use, and the County Council have said as much and have questioned whether they would even adopt and maintain it after the power station is built. Not only that, the figures that we've been looking at are purely for Sizewell C, I beg your pardon. The amount of transport that's also going to be required for the proposed Friston substations, interconnectors and various other energy projects that are planned around here haven't been factored in properly. And therefore the transport solutions that EDF have come up with are purely those to help EDF, not to look at the big picture. just to give you a quick impression of what the implications are, I'm going to share with you a couple of headlines from the Hinckley site, which no, I'm not, because my sharing facility has been disabled, so I won't share you with those. But suffice to say, if you look up Hinckley traffic on Google, you'll find a lot of articles, both in the national and local press, about traffic problems in and around Hinckley and the implications that has on the local people there. Moving on to the economy then, as Ali has already mentioned, the economic benefits that EDF are claiming for our area are not, they don't stand up. And the reason that they don't stand up is that, it doesn't look at the full picture.
Charles, just to interrupt, I have changed the sharing settings, so I hope that you can share your screen now. I apologise.
So I'll just rattle through that. That's a Guardian article, London level traffic to small Somerset town. A crash at outside the Hinckley site, which caused enormous chaos and sadly resulted in the death of a cyclist. And coming on to the economics, the kind of jobs that EDF are proposing for local people are generally at the lower end of the scale in terms of income. The skilled workers will be coming from elsewhere, mostly from Hinckley. And indeed, EDF have said as much, because in order to drive down the costs, they want to bring in the Hinkley's existing supply chain. So the opportunities for skilled local workers and local companies here in Suffolk to get involved are significantly lower than they are claiming. And even when they talk about local people, the local that they refer to is in fact a 90-minute commute, which takes in the edge of Cambridge, Chelmsford, in fact most of East Anglia. But what about the local businesses here? They are not going to be unaffected. Tourism will be affected by the congestion that we've referred to. EDF have already pointed out and expect to be poaching recruits from existing local businesses. So those will have a negative effect on the tourism industry in our area and indeed other businesses that we have. So in their own tourism survey have said that 29% of the tourists that are currently coming to this part of the world will be deterred by the construction program. Now, this is EDF's own survey. So I leave you to take on board what effect that's going to have. Now, bear with me. Okay. So I looked up, somebody said to me that Leiston and the surrounding area will be a boom town. And I questioned this and in fact looked up what boomtown is listed under in Wikipedia. And Wikipedia says that a boomtown is a site of economic growth and social disruption, as caused by, which brings local culture and infrastructure struggling to accommodate the economic growth, with negative impacts on medical facilities, education, housing, and lack of recreation. And it's frequently followed by a bust, boom and bust. And that And indeed, when you look at Leiston, you can see that it hasn't really benefited from 2 previous nuclear power stations. And I see no evidence as to why this one should be any different. So that's all from me on the tourism and economy, and I hope very much to answer some of your questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Charles. I'd like to invite Adam Rowlands now from the RSPB, who we're very happy has joined us.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I do apologise if you hear sort of any external noise. There's some construction work actually taking place just outside the room, and also my neighbour, who is a trombone instructor, is clearly giving a trombone lesson. So if you hear any sound in the background that sounds inappropriate to the commentary, some of it might actually sound appropriate, but that will be the reason. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to mainly focus on the environmental impacts that RSPB have. I'd like to point out that RSPB are working closely with other organisations in terms of preparation of our responses to Sizewell C, particularly with Wildlife Trust, but also with National Trust. Just want to check, I'm getting a message, my speaker is not working. Can you hear me clearly, Ali?
You're cutting in and out a little bit, but it suddenly improved, so I was going to let you go with it.
I shall continue. If it seems to be a problem, I'll see if I can change my setup to help with that. Yeah, so I'm going to focus on environmental points, but just to highlight as well, as Charles pointed out there, in terms of those economic impacts, the RSPB does have concerns, the role that Minsmere plays in the local tourist economy, that decline in visitors as a consequence, both to the RSPB's operation at Minsmere, but also the other service industry businesses that work alongside those people who come to visit Minsmere. So that knock-on domino effect across the tourism economy that's so important on our coast. But coming back to the environmental impacts, as I say, we're working with Suffolk Wildlife Trust, with National Trust, Friends of the Earth and others. So the points I'll be focusing on are those that RSPB is largely taking a lead on, but it won't be an exhaustive run through all of the impacts, which are significant. I'd also just like to say as well, just that we're still developing, like others, our relevant representation, which hear about the process in due course, and we're still consulting with our legal and our casework team. So this will modify over the coming weeks. So apologies, this is our current position, but it is developing as we speak. Overall, I think the critical thing, as I'm sure won't be lost on all of you, I mean, RSPB has submitted representations to the previous consultations, and overall our sense is a lot of our concerns, despite the 56,000 pages of information, a lot of our concerns have not been satisfactorily addressed. And one of our biggest concerns is that the assessment to support that a number of the environmental impacts will not be significant is not sufficient. It's inadequate for purpose. So it's an overarching concern. And also that a lot of the impacts it's concluded are not going to be a problem, because they will be addressed by monitoring and mitigation strategies, which are still to be developed. And again, as an approach, we are not satisfied that that is appropriate, because basically if you can't say how you will mitigate an impact, then it is not appropriate to claim that that impact is therefore not significant. A lot of the key information is missing in terms of detailed designs, and I'm sure Paul will come on to this, but we're strongly concerned about coastal process impacts on the Minsmere frontage, and the lack of design detail for coastal defences under Sizewell are a problem, and in the same way, a lack of detailed design around the crossing across the Triple SI on the southern Minsmere boundary and adjacent to the Sizewell Marshes Triple SI. Again, without that detail, we cannot have confidence in assessing their impacts. And also as well, just as an overarching concern, we don't feel that the application sufficiently assesses the total impact. So there's a lot of assessment of individual impacts, but it doesn't necessarily bring together to say what's the cumulative impact of the various elements of the proposed development. And we've a strong concern that without that cumulative impact, that in essence, individual impacts could be concluded to be okay without realising that their in combination effect is significant. So we're really concerned that in essence, the total effects on the integrity of the sites, the assessment of that is unsound. I've touched on, I know Paul will come onto it, but in essence, we feel there's insufficient evidence of the impacts of the proposal on coastal processes and the impact that will have on the Minsmere frontage and the wider frontage along the sites that are designated for their conservation interest. And we're also concerned as well in some of those impacts offshore on the marine ecology as well of some of the development. So there's a substantial amount of the development that's proposed offshore could impact on some of the marine bird species, particularly wintering red-throated divers and the terns that forage offshore that breed on the coast at Minsmere and further afield. We've got strong concerns around the hydrology and the impacts on groundwater, both on the SSSI on Sizewell marshes and on the adjacent Minsmere to Walberswick site. So the Sizewell marshes SSSI are hydrologically linked to the Minsmere levels, and at the moment we're not convinced the evidence is sufficient to determine that hydrology will not affect in a way that will impact the ecology. We're particularly concerned around the proposals around the sheep piling and the cut-off wall and the realignment of the Lake Sizewell drain and the impacts that that will have. And we're concerned, again, we're not satisfied that the potential for leachate, so in terms of water quality impacts as well, won't affect the designated sites. And in essence as well, we're concerned about some of the flood risk assessments. I mean, one of the flood risk assessments recognises that there is a potential risk to property in the Minsmere level from the proposal to create a water storage facility in the Minsmere level. But what it doesn't do is what the environmental impact is of that. So that's a real concern to us. Ali touched earlier on the noise disturbance, and again, in environmental space, the noise and the visual disturbance could have a significant impact, particularly on bird species, wintering waterfowl, and particularly on marsh harrier. And you'll have noticed, I'm sure those of you who've read these sections, that the RSP, that EDF are proposing to provide some compensatory habitat for marsh harriers. And they've talked about that taking overriding public interest as the route for that compensation. We'll be looking closely at the assessment they've done, and at the moment we're not happy that we've seen the evidence that that process is satisfactory in terms of looking for alternatives to avoid those impacts. And we're certainly concerned that their proposals around compensatory foraging habitat are just not sufficient for the species effects. We're concerned as well, as you mentioned, in terms of that increase of that, both the influx of workers to the area and also the displacement from the existing public rights of way that will be closed during construction. So that recreational displacement, moving people within the area to wildlife value, the impact that that might have. So again, we're looking at in detail, particularly the heathland habitats that surround Minsmere, both on Minsmere and the impact of those areas. And we're very interested in and concerned about the direct take of SSSI, particularly on the Sizewell marshes, and we don't feel that the process, both towards compensatory habitat is satisfactory. And we're also concerned as well about some areas where they've identified a temporary take of SSSI and what that actually means. Given it's a 10-year construction period, a temporary take of SSSI for 10 years is going to mean that that's irretrievable. Coming to the last of our significant concerns as well, protected species, and Suffolk Wildlife Trust are taking a lead on a lot of this work, but we're particularly concerned about impacts on bats, very important bat populations on Sizewell, and impact on natterjack toads as well, that have a important population at the southern edge of Minsmere on the land managed by the Suffolk Wildlife Trust, potentially significant impact on those protected species. So that's just outlining the key areas of concern comprehensively, all of the environmental concerns, but I hope that gives some flavour, and I hope that's useful to people in terms of the level of concern currently with the application.
Thanks, Adam. Your sound did sort of come and go. I think most of us could get most of what you said. I hope so. Anyway, certainly I could. But I was going to suggest turning your video off, but every time I was about to suggest it, your sound came back again. So I sort of I left well alone. But hopefully there'll be some questions if people were unable to hear bits of it, and we'll be able to get you to answer those. So I'm going to pass to Paul now, who's going to touch on a few other related issues.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Collins. I'm the chair of Stop Sizewell C, and I'm also part of Minsmere Level Stakeholder Group and a local councillor. I will actually repeat a couple of things that Adam said, just because they were very garbled, but I won't go into the sort of levels of detail that he's been into. Anyway, I think we have to remember that the area of outstanding natural beauty will be cut in half for 10 to 12 years, and that really compromises the AONB designation. As well as cutting it in half, there is things like the accommodation campus, which is right on the edge of the AONB. So it's a fairly comprehensive cut through this area, and will impact tourism as well as all of the connectedness between all of these habitats that Adam was talking about, between Sizewell Marsh and the Minsmere levels. We still have a case where the spoil heaps are going to be up to 35 metres high, which are going to have serious consequences for dust, as well as for runoff during rain. Anybody who lives in this area and sees what happens to the fields when the rain comes, and therefore what's going to happen to those spoil heaps, which will be full of materials which is very, very easily mobilised, is going to be considerable. The causeway crossing of the SSSI is still an issue for effects on water levels in both the Sizewell Marsh and the Minsmere levels. It's not clear how badly that will make, for instance, the Sizewell Marsh wetter than it is currently, as well as potentially drying out the Minsmere levels at some level. And those levels are quite critical for the habitats that are in both of those areas. Adding on to that is the whole issue of what will happen to the Minsmere sluice. The Minsmere sluice drains both of these areas, and is also, if you think about Leiston, it is the route out for Leiston sewage work. So it's going to make potentially quite a difficult time for the Minsmere sluice over the next 12 to 15 years, as rain events will change the levels of surface water runoff. The hard areas on this side, or semi-permeable areas, which will drain into water management zones, but it's not clear how they're going to be able to manage that in a sufficient way not to cause problems downstream, down into the Minsmere sluice. The Marsh Harrier, which I think Adam has already talked about, the fact that they have come to the conclusion that actually they don't think they can actually fully compensate for the disturbance, and that's what this imperative reasons of overriding public interest is all about. That's a pretty bad thing for a company to have to admit when they make a development proposal of this nature. When it comes to water for this particular, for the whole of the construction period and later on when it's in operation, there's still there's a lack of clarity of where all of the water will come from. And there's a basic admission that they don't think that Essex and Suffolk water can actually provide sufficient, because they've had to put an additional reservoir down on the Minsmere levels close to the sluice path. But in fact, what they haven't really given a sound answer for is how they're actually going to get the water to fill that and maintain it. The reason for this additional reservoir is really for the concrete production. Massive amounts of water are needed to produce all of the concrete that goes into this development. and they might be hoping that this thing fills up with rain in the winter, but it certainly isn't going to be sufficient to do that for the entire year. And there have been a variety of suggestions in the document, but no firm conclusions. Some of the suggestions involve buying out some of our farmers' abstraction licenses. The other one is actually pumping water from close to the Minsmere sluice back up to where this reservoir is. However, we know when the sluice was being refurbished 2 or 3 years ago, which is probably 3 or 4 years ago now, when they pumped the water from the new cut into across the dunes and down into the sea, we know that that actually reduced the levels of water in the marsh. And this will happen again. If you start pumping water out of the sluice, this will happen again. So that will make further impacts, apart from what might happen from the SSSI crossing, to the levels of water on the marsh. The coastal defence on the front of the site actually doesn't have a design. When you look at what's in their documents, they have 3 sketches, which are inadequate. They actually say that they do not represent the actual fence, and that they may go down further than they're able to do. Because right now, those defences of rock armour only reach to 1 metre above the midpoint between high and low water. In order to get down to the correct level, they need to be 3.5 metres deeper than they currently are proposed in those sketches. But then again, the sketches say they may not represent the actual defence, which is really ridiculous. Because when you look at what happened at Hinkley Point have engineering drawings in the DCO application for the entire frontage, which has had a flood defence built into it. And it also has a clear idea of what's going to happen as sea level rises, should they need to actually raise it. Unfortunately, EDF sketches here don't give us any clue of what is going to happen. They state quite confidently that they expect the defence to be exposed by the actions of the sea at around 2050, somewhere around that. Now that's only 16 years after the project start date, or after the power station starts generating. But there's another 120 years before all the spent fuel and waste will be removed from the site. So what is this thing? It's basically saying it's going to be exposed 10% of the way in to its period that it actually needs to protect the station. It's an absolute nonsense. Also, EDF have made no analysis of the coastal effects north of the Minsmere sluice and south of the Ness at Thorpe Ness. We already have serious erosion taking place at Thorpe Ness, at Aldborough, around Southwold Harbour and Walberswick. So they really have to do what was instructed by them in the scoping opinion from the Secretary of State, which says you need to look seriously both south and north of this Sizewell frontage and actually give a proper account of what you think is going to happen. That's all I have to say at this moment, and I'll pass back to Ali now for any further information.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry we're having a few sound issues this evening, but hopefully you could hear, I could certainly hear all of Paul, although there were times when it was a little bit broken up. We have some questions. What I'm going to do is I'll find the participant who's asking the question and try and start your video and start your sound again. I did turn off everybody's video because I thought it might help Adam's broadband. But I've got a question from Nigel Hiley about hydrogen. So Nigel, I'm going to ask you to start your video and start your microphone, and you can ask your question.
Great, thanks Alice. And we've read recently that EDF are floating the idea of producing hydrogen using excess energy from Sizewell C. From what you can see, is there any room on the site to do that, or will they need to grab more land to proceed with that application? Or will the hydrogen facility possibly be located elsewhere in the area?
Paul, can I get you to answer that?
Certainly. Yeah, good point. It's an interesting proposal. I mean, they did think about starting a hydrogen experimental proposal up at Heysham, but then cancelled it. The strange thing about this is that what they want to do, they say they want to use, they've modified the design of the reactor so that actually some of the high level heat that comes out of it, which normally drives the turbines, will actually be used to make the whole hydrogen production more efficient. Problem with that is there is nowhere close to the site that you can actually put this thing. As it is, we've been worried about the fact that there's only 32 hectares on this site to put it in. They had to move several areas from Sizewell B, or they're having to move across into other parts of the Sizewell estate. And there's nowhere at the moment to put the underground cables, which has left us with some very tall pylons on the site. So the answer to the question, is there somewhere close by that you can put this? The answer is no. And if you start looking around a little bit further off-site, if you go south, all of the interconnectors and wind farm cable routes come in between Thorpe Ness and Sizewell. If you look to the west, you have the Gabbard and Galloper wind farm substations, both of which are going to be expanded. And I would presume, although it's not clear, that's where they will expand. And behind the station to the west anyway is Sizewell Marsh. You simply cannot put that sort of facility on Sizewell Marsh. And the other side of to the north, where the entranceway will be to Sizewell C, this is all supposed to be land that's going to be sent back to nature and rewilded or made into lowland heath habitat. So the answer is no, there isn't anywhere to put this. And it actually doesn't help the situation in that there will basically they'll be using high quality heat. They're not going to start using the low quality 60% of the heat, which actually gets sent out to the North Sea. So it's all a bit pie in the sky, quite frankly.
And just before we go on to the next question, I wanted to add that if making hydrogen from nuclear power is so amazing, why aren't they talking about doing it at Hinkley? And the simple answer is that they don't need to make a case for building Hinkley because it's already under construction, but they do need to make a case for building Sizewell C. And I think it was very telling that that story was given to the Times just a few days after the CO2 story that we had in the Times. So EDF were obviously a bit cheesed off about that. I'm going to ask Josie now, who has a question to Adam to unmute. Adam, maybe let's try. Maybe turn your video on to answer, and if it doesn't work or the sound doesn't work, turn it off again. Are you there, Josie?
Yeah, I'm here. You can hear me, I assume?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I actually just wanted to understand, with all of these environmental impact assessments that you discussed that haven't been done, and also we heard about the coastal assessments, particularly up around Walbeswick and South Walden South, also haven't been done. Is this enough to make the planning inspectorate say, okay, look, we can't go any farther until this work is finished? Or is there some strange thing that allows them to just go ahead without this information? It just seems so shocking to me, because I mean, you can't even put up a house, if you haven't put in these environmental assessments. So that I'd appreciate it if you could explain this a little bit to us.
Are you happy for me to come in there, Ali? I might try it with my video off. Oh, I think you might be muted now, Ali. I can't hear you.
You sound good. You sound good.
You sound good, Adam. Go for it.
Excellent. I shall apologies for not being visible, but I shall try that instead. So thanks, Josie. And yes, absolutely. I mean, the current RSPB position is we do not believe that this build should go ahead based on the evidence that we've seen. And certainly that's what we were considering after seeing the information that was provided for the public consultations ahead of the DCO submission. And as I indicated, the DCO application hasn't alleviated those concerns. So that's still our current position. Basically, the planning inspectorate will review the evidence. And again, when Paul and Alison talk about the process, in essence, that will set out the process by way people raise their concerns, provoke the arguments that then inform the recommendations that the planning inspectorate will make. There is some recent precedent. So the proposed new nuclear development at Wilver, twice the Secretary of State, following the planning inspectorate's recommendations, has deferred the decision on that construction. And part of the reason that's being given, I mean, there's a huge, like with all these nuclear projects, there's a huge amount of political considerations, no doubt, behind the scenes, but the Secretary of State has said on the 2 occasions that decision's been deferred, that the environmental concerns haven't been adequately addressed. So it is very, important that these points are raised and heard, because that can influence the planning inspectorate. And certainly the RSPB's position would be that if a development was to go ahead where we considered the environmental assessment was inadequate, we would be calling on people to shout as loudly as possible to make sure that those concerns were heard.
Alison, sorry, could I just do a quick follow-up on that?
Yes, of course, Josie.
Thank you, Adam. That helps. And then I assume when we do our relevant representations, we would be making not just the point about our concerns about the environmental, but that point to say they've not provided the information, and therefore it shouldn't go anywhere until the information's there. In terms of the coastal follow-up question, is there an argument to be made on a safety issue as opposed to an environmental issue, that the power plant wouldn't be safe because they've not done the analysis on what happens on the coast? And again, I'm just trying to think of things that would be more meaningful to a government that's a nuclear supporter. Presumably they don't want to put something here that's going to, turn into blowing up all of Suffolk and East Anglia. So is that the kinds of things that those of you who are experts in this are thinking through or will point out?
Paul, would you like to respond?
Yeah, actually, thanks, Josie. Yeah, this has been picked up, and as part of Mizmir level stakeholder group and Suffolk Coast Action for Resilience, which is a grouping of all of the coastal concerned groups that look after various parts of the coast, monitor it, and then work with the local authorities like Coastal Partnership East, Suffolk Coast Forum, to actually look at all of those coastal issues. We actually sent in a submission to East Suffolk Council saying that actually the failings in the coastal protection part of it were sufficient that we don't think the DCO should actually be accepted as valid. I mean, it really is a serious issue that they don't have an adequate coastal protection plan for this or mitigation, because as I mentioned about the Hinkley Point plan, it actually has a proper plan for what they're going to put in at the beginning, and also how they're going to actually double the height of it or make it much higher by building a second defence behind the one that's currently being put in. So there's a very, very clear strategy for how they're going to protect that site. There is no clear strategy about how they can protect this site or how they can actually then follow it up. All they've talked about is putting some more soft coastal defence, which is basically moving sand in front of the hard coastal defence, or the rock armour that comprises that. So yes, it's a serious failing. It really is a serious failing. And it's not only the planning inspectorate who will be interested in this. The Office for Nuclear Regulation has to actually look at the safety of the site over the full period that the site will be active to the point at which it will be decommissioned and taken away. They have to look at that, which is over 140 years. So they have to look at that in some serious detail. So if they cannot be convinced, then the license will not be granted. And that process has to happen during the PIN's examination, because the inspectors will want to know whether the ONR are satisfied with their plans. At the moment, there are no plans, there's a sketch. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Josie. Nigel Smith has a question.
Yeah, I can't turn my video on. I don't know if that's
Don't worry.
important.
No, not at all.
Okay. It says, Josh, you've stopped it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I've asked you to start it. It might invite you to start it.
Thank you very much. My principal question is, EDF, I think at stage 2, put forward a possible jetty, and they gave us an option: do you want a short fat one or a long thin one? They then dismissed it out of hand, saying that it would cause silting up, it would upset harbour porpoises, etc. But their solution was, I mean, it was a 16th century pier with sort of 6-metre piles. Has anybody looked at, or has the EDF examined the possibility of a much wider pile spacing? It'd be a lot more expensive, but it might get round the various problems. And another, if I could just ask one very small supplementary question. At stage 1 and 2, EDF told me they definitely could not build a relief road unless they were instructed by government. Have they been, does anybody else recall them saying that, and have they been so instructed? That's mine. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to, Adam, do you want to say anything about the sort of impacts on the marine environment of the jetty, and whether you know that if they considered anything more? And Charles, you could perhaps jump in on the other question.
Yeah, it's I might need someone else to come in terms of those sort of technical solutions with the jetty. I mean, I know we raised concerns in our kind of initial contact, as Nigel's pointed out there, in terms of any effect on coastal processes that might be adverse. And as Nigel said as well, I think when we questioned EDF as to why they'd remove the jetty, they did give the reason of the impacts. They couldn't mitigate the impacts on harbour porpoises of the sound created, I think it was, by the piling activity. So beyond that, it seems, yeah, I don't have any further comment on, you know, the alternatives that could be considered there.
Thank you.
Charles, do you want to answer on the road?
Well, I think interestingly, Nigel, the two things are indeed connected, because after stage 3, I think it was, we heard informally from one of the EDF people that there wouldn't be a link road unless they weren't able to build the jetty. So the traffic pressure that the absence of the jetty created then brought the need to build a link road, because it was entirely clear that the B1122 wouldn't be able to cope with the number of trucks, even at that point, let alone their most recent projections.
Right. I accept that, Charles, but did they not say at the outset that they would not build this road unless specifically instructed by the department?
It's not a sentence or a statement that I ever heard, I confess.
I did, but anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We just had a couple more things, which I may, because we're getting a little short of time, I may go through quickly. Jay Shaw asks if there is wider permission for showing the excellent film that was shown to limited numbers. I think that you're probably talking about the French nuclear trap, and I understand that it will be available by pay-per-view on YouTube at some point in the not too distant future. So that's good news. And Brigitte, you're asking a question about sort of escaping heat and how that impacts marine life. Do you mind if we sort of deal with that separately by email? Because it's just quite a technical question, and I think with the shortness of time, it would be great if we could start talking about the process for responding. Are you all right with that, Brigitte? Sorry.
Yes, that's fine. That's great. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you. All right, I'll make sure you get a response to that. I'm going to invite Paul then to give an overview of what's happening by the 30th of September and what we want everybody to do.
Right. Yes, I should unmute. Okay, so by the 30th of September, we want as many people as possible to register as interested parties. An interested party then has the right to attend the various hearings. You have a right to request to speak at the various hearings. And the way you do this is by putting in what we call a relevant representation. And this can be done on the Sizewell C Planning Inspectorate site. If you go to that site now, it will actually just be front and center, and you can register as an interested party. What this means is you need to put down your laundry list of things that you would like the inspectors to examine. So that might be stuff about coastal processes, it might be stuff about habitats, it might be things about the Sizewell Link Road, whatever it is. We are going to have a short version of our relevant representation. In fact, I think it's already on our website, which is 500 words. It basically, or thereabouts, it basically lists just a whole set of items that we're actually interested in and that we will be responding to. And we would invite you to actually pick and choose from that those things which you feel strongly about. We'd ask you as well, when you make a relevant representation, if you can put it in your own words, it'll go down much better. If it looks like a cut and paste, the planning inspectorate will go, oh, another one of those. So if you can at least redo it in your own words, that would be the best way of doing it. So once you put in your relevant representation, you will get an identification number from PINS, and they will start telling you about all of the processes that come beyond that. So between now and the 30th of September, please do put in a relevant representation and make yourself an interested party on those issues that you feel strongly about. Now, there may be things that you know about this development which don't appear in our relevant representation, but feel free to put those in. So our relevant representation is very much focused on this very close area around Leiston, Middleton, Yoxford, the A12, Sizewell Link Road, this sort of area. There will be other things that may be not so well covered in there. So out in Westleton, on the road out to Blytheborough, traffic down there, a whole bunch of things. So feel free to put all of those items into there as well. What happens after the 30th of September is the planning inspectorate will take a look at all of those relevant representations, and they'll effectively make a large list of all of the items that everybody has asked that they pay particular attention to in the examination. If something doesn't appear in that large list, it will not get reviewed. It will not get examined unless it is clearly something which is contrary to building regulations or whatever. Unless that is the case, it will not be examined. So you need to try and make sure, this is why we need to try and make sure we pick up as many of the issues that are not addressed or you think are not properly addressed inside the documents. About 2 months later or thereabouts, towards the end of the year, the planning inspectorate will come back and start the initial hearings. The first ones are all about the process that's going to go on. And one of the things that we suggest in our relevant representation is you say you don't think that this is suitable for a virtual hearing. So virtual hearings are about to restart for the Friston Scottish Power planning application. But this is a very complicated application compared to those. And so we would encourage you to say that it is not suitable for a virtual planning application, hearing or examination. Other things that I was going to say, well, so they will tell us at that point when the initial examination hearings are declared and when the first open hearings are, and then there's about a 6-month period where all of these hearings will take place. They won't give us a complete rundown about those, but the first things that will appear is that they will start asking for your written submissions and more details about what you put in your relevant representation. And those dates are liable to be in early next year. But it is important that you meet those deadlines and dates. The fact that you're an interested party means you will be requested to put in your written representations, and you will have the opportunity to speak about them if you so wish. In many cases, the planning inspector will try and find like-minded groups to work together to get a single representation for that particular subject, and see if we can actually have spokespersons or people who will speak on our behalf. So those are the sorts of things that will happen once the planning examination gets started. And I think that's enough for now. But as things move on, we will actually still keep you up to date with further information. We do have a very long version of our relevant representation on the website, which has more detail in it, but the details really come later, and that's when we'll start to be filling in all of the information that we feel that is specific in their applications, or we think that is missing. Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly share the screen if my it will let me. For some reason, the screen sharing option seems to have disappeared. Okay, so I won't do that. But I was going to just again reiterate that on our website, stopsizewellc.org, on the top menu there is an item called Take Part in the Planning Process, and we'll put a copy of this video on that page, and you can find a 4-page briefing on all of the key areas that we've pulled out of the DCO application so far, and detailed instructions on how to register as an interested party. And a link to the template relevant representation, which is this 500-word submission that Paul was talking about, and on our reasons for encouraging as many individuals to do so as possible. So I can see that we've already got some questions. Thank you, Adam's done a little written response to Brigitte about some of the impacts on marine wildlife. The citing of the park and rides, yes, in our template relevant representation, we have highlighted that communities oppose the locations of both the north and south of park and rides. Richard Gray is asking, how does becoming an interested party achieve anything if Stop Sizewell C's own representation covers the topics? Well, to briefly answer you, we want to encourage as many individuals to register as interested parties as possible, because that shows the breadth of concern that is about the issue, about Sizewell C. The Scottish Power Renewables DCO had over 800 people register as an interested party, which is a phenomenal number, and I think we would really hope that we would see a similar number do the same for Sizewell C. If the planning inspectorate is reading multiple times in different words, because as Paul says, it's much more impactful if you put things in your own words, that, X, Y, and Z are all issues, then it just sends a really, really strong message that those are things that need to be addressed in the examination. So you can endorse our relevant representation, but sort of saying what the issues of concern are for you personally in your own words is going to be incredibly powerful. I'm sorry, I'm sort of rattling through this because I'm conscious that people said they were limited for time. But Nigel's asking, is it a valid point of issue to complain about the conduct of the consultation process? The answer is yes, you can. The real time to do that was when EDF's application went in and the planning inspectorate was deciding whether or not to accept it. But there's certainly no harm in putting in a complaint about the consultation process. You may find that you don't have a massive amount of space to wax eloquently about this, but as Paul reiterated, your issues of concern really just need to be a list at this point. And Ian is asking, saying the PIN site says you can't contradict national policy. This severely limits what we can say. Does it mean we can't write about cost nuclear waste, etc.? Yes, it's true. The planning inspectorate is saying that the examination scope won't include a re-examination of national policy. Regardless, we are proposing to put in our relevant representation a statement about how Sizewell is not a suitable site, and how the national policy in any case is very outdated. It's possible that the planning inspectorate will just reject that out of hand, but they shouldn't reject our entire relevant representation. So we certainly feel those are worthwhile points to make, and you are very welcome to do the same. But you know, make sure that you've got the space to say the things you really want to say. Mark Beaumont is asking, can anyone register to make a relevant representation, or do you have to be a local land or business owner? The answer is anyone can. They don't even have to live in the area. If you know of people further afield who know and love East Suffolk and are concerned about Sizewell, then by all means encourage them to put in a relevant representation as well. Multiple people per household, yes, by all means, but just make sure that they're different from each other, because if they are different, the planning inspector's got to read every single one, whereas if they're the same and recognisably so, then it might just be dismissed or overlooked. Angie is saying, I'm not sure how you're promoting your campaign locally, but Nextdoor website is useful to contact individuals in the community. Are you able to have paid Facebook ads? And the answer to that is yes, we are. And hopefully later today or tomorrow, a new social media campaign will be launched, which is an initiative jointly with Together Against Sizewell C, to both reach more people in the local area, but also more people nationally about this issue. And over the summer, we had leaflets, I was looking around to see if I had an example, delivered to about 45,000 households in the Suffolk coastal constituency with information about Sizewell C. And we have certainly drawn more attention as a result, and our council leaders had lots of messages as a result of that. We have got more of those leaflets, so if you know of places that visitors go to, or if you know of people sort of in Dan Poulter's constituency or elsewhere that may not have received one but would find it interesting to know, then drop us an email and we can post some out to you, because we do recognise that not everybody uses social media, although the vast majority do. And Kate's asking, how do we get Ed Sheeran on board? Well, we do know someone who knows him, so we're hoping that they're going to have a little word, but he's just had a baby, so it's possible that he's taking some downtime. Let's see, fingers crossed. Yes, and Brigitte's jumping in and saying what a good idea. The answer is we're not sure what his views are, but I'm sure that his views are mostly focused on his family at this immediate moment. But as you say, as a new parent, he might well have a concern. Sorry, I would have liked to have sort of drawn people in for those questions, but it was proving quite difficult to get everybody's video started again. Are there any other questions about the procedure? Just give you a moment to. No? Okay, I'm going to just have one more go at trying to share my screen. For some reason it's completely turned off. It was there a minute ago. The wonders of Zoom will never cease. All right, well, I will just then wrap up, I think, with just a few words about sort of other things that you can do. So obviously the big takeaway is to get as many people as possible to register as an interested party by the 30th of September, and to go to our website where you should find everything you need. And if there isn't everything you need, then please don't hesitate to let us know what's missing, because our absolute priority is to be there and help you every step of the way. In terms of just what's coming afterwards, as Paul indicated, you know, towards the end of the year, the examining body will lay out what the issues are for the more detailed public examinations that should take place early next year. Those should conclude normally by the end of May or so, but of course we don't know what impact COVID is going to have on this timetable. And then the Planning Inspectorate will need to make a recommendation to the Business Secretary, probably by the end of the summer, about whether or not this project should receive planning consent. And the earliest we would expect the Secretary of State to make that decision would be around late November 2021. But as I say, it's very difficult to know that timetable. So, you know, there is going to be quite a lot more time before we get to the end of this process. And I just want to reassure you and reiterate that we'll be with you every step of the way. So don't feel like you're biting off more than you can chew, or that you're committing yourself to a step that you don't know you can follow through on by registering as an interested party, because we will be there to help you. And just by registering, you're not actually committing yourself to any particular course of action. So please just take that first step, because if you don't, then the opportunity to engage in the process will unfortunately may be lost. So what else you can do? Well, as Paul indicated, the Sizewell C application is totally unsuitable for digital examination. And on our website, you'll find the email address of the Community Secretary, Robert Jenrick, to whom we would encourage you to write and really spell that message out, and send copies to our MP, your MP if you're not in our constituency, and district and county council leaders. So the leader of the East Suffolk District Council, Steve Gallant, did say in an email to us in the summer that he tended to agree that the Sizewell application was too complicated for digital hearings. So let's try and hold him to that. As I say, we're going to have a new social media campaign launched very, very soon. It's going to link to a new petition on the website stopsizewellcpetition.com. Subtle differences there. So do look out for it if you're followers of ours or Together Against Sizewell C on social media, because you'll start to see that very, very soon indeed. If you don't follow us on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn, and you just look for the handle at stopsizewellc. We're always grateful for financial contributions. There's a link on our website, a nice orange button that says donate, where you can find our bank details and a link to make credit card donations. So if you are able to help us and help us to keep going with this campaigning, then we'd be enormously grateful. But in the meantime, I think we'll probably leave it there, and we very much look forward to hearing you from you and seeing you again at our next meeting, wherever or whenever that may be. Thanks very much, everybody. So we'll say good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.